All right. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to week 3 of Rivers and Streams. I'm joined by my good friend Dianna Shyne here.
Hi. Hello. Sorry about the delay. My computer was acting up and I had to reboot twice. So,
Yeah.
um, but I'm really happy to be here today and I'm really happy to do this because rivers and
Mm-hmm.
streams are really close to my heart. I've lived by a river my whole life and they've always inspired me art. So I hope they inspire you as well today. Um,
Yes. Thank you guys for all your patience, being
right.
patient with us. It was just, it happens. I know some people in chat were saying, I know technical difficulties. So, yeah, they're no stranger to those.
Uh-huh, good. I'm so glad. Well, we're going to just hope that that was the end of them.
Yes.
Um,
Fingers
and
crossed.
what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over. Peter, I just want to tell you because we didn't have a chance to discuss this while I
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
reading. I'm going to I'm going to switch back and forth between my slide presentation um, and my paints today
Okay.
because I want to do little short demos as we go through the presentation.
Okay.
And I hope you have your paints ready too. We're just going to do some studies. You had two really beautiful, fantastic, um, full demos of rivers and streams the first 2 weeks. So I thought we would dig in and do some little studies on learning some techniques of how to get movement, how to get reflection, those kinds of things. So more than a big demo, I'm doing little short, technique studies. So that's what we're doing today.
Sounds
And
fantastic.
I am going to switch over to my program now. So Peter, unless we want to go down that endless tunnel, you might want to switch me off for
Okay.
just a second.
Yeah, sounds good.
There we go.
I'll
Okay.
take the
And
spotlight for a second. Yeah, thank
uh,
you guys for being patient. How many of you did Diana's mini painting challenge this morning? How many of you? I want to see if there's anyone out there. I know I saw one. I'm curious if there are others. Um, but lots of you joined Diana's mini challenge for
it,
this new year.
yeah, it's great. And today's mini challenge is a little house I saw in Key West. And part of that mini challenge is I goofed up right in the middle. And so it's a little extra long because I sort of show you how I fixed my goof up. So you just got to paint right along with me, warts and all.
There
Okay,
you
I'm
go.
ready with rivers and
All
streams.
right, I'll switch back to you.
All
There you
right,
go.
thanks. Okay, are we seeing the front page, rivers and streams now? Is
Um,
that what we're looking at?
oh, we're seeing your camera right now.
Oh, okay. Hang on. I
Um,
let's see.
oh, I think StreamYard is picking up on your computer's camera. It might not be using the OBS camera.
Oh, okay. Well, let's see where we can find that. um,
Yeah, totally. Just go to settings and then camera and change to
yes, it switched on me when we did that. Okay.
okay. Cool. It
Another little
worked.
technical difficulty. Okay, I am going to switch back over to my um, display capture now and
Yes.
rivers and streams. Let's see if we can you see it now?
Yes.
Oh, good.
We're all
There
good to
we
go.
go. This is a little section of the Chihuahua River up in the Cascades. I wanted to just take a look at some rivers. This is the Columbia River. I lived near the Columbia River my whole childhood, moved away. I was in Washington State. And now that I've moved back down to Oregon, I now live once again about a mile from the Columbia River. I feel like my mom could throw a message in a bottle and it would bob downstream to me here. But one of the things that happens when I'm teaching students and when people are painting water is that they get the impression that water is blue. And so we're going to just do a little bit today, taking us beyond the blue to reflection, to movement, to what it is about water that makes it so unique and so special to paint. Um, First of all, I want to just amend everything I say with trust your eyes. When you're looking at things, um, nature provides us and presents us with just this amazing diversity. There are tools we can use and standards we can see, things that happen in nature pretty consistently. But it is more important to trust what you're seeing, to trust your eyes. And sometimes we only see what we expect to see. For instance, I've had students who look at a beautiful green river and paint it blue because they think they're seeing blue. When it's explained to them that that river is reflecting trees and they're green, all of a sudden they see the green. So trust your eyes, but open your mind to all kinds of new ideas about what's possible in reflected water and in rivers and streams. The first thing I wanted to talk to you about with water is reflection. We're accustomed to seeing reflections in a mirror, face to face. But rivers are a mirror laying down flat on the ground. So they are reflecting something very different than a mirror that's standing upright. When we see reflections, we maybe will not see the reflection of these distant hills in the left-hand photo, for instance, because they're too far set back. The mirror of the water is reflecting what's directly above it and directly on the sides. You can't even see the tops of these grasses reflected because they are facing up, not down. When we look at the photo of the bridge, we can see that what's reflected in the water is the underside of the bridge, not the side of the bridge, like we're used to seeing in mirrors. It's reflecting what's directly above it. Keeping that in mind, we're going to look at some things about water. Water is an imperfect mirror, and it reflects everything that's above it. Usually what we're seeing when we see blue water is the water's reflecting sky. The smoother the water is, the more it's an exact mirror image of what it's looking at. But those mirror image reflections become distorted by ripples and movement in the water. We're going to examine some of this. So when we see a mirror image, we know that the water is very smooth. When we see a distorted image or a broken image, we know that the water is rippling or moving. It's very simple. That's very simple. There's another thing that happens in reflections in water that we need to pay attention to. Reflections of light and mid-value items like these trees reflect a little bit darker than the real thing. Reflections of dark things like these shadows and these shadows reflect a little bit lighter. So the values are just slightly more together in the water. Let's take a look at this in black and white. And you can see that although the water is reflecting all those things, lighter images are a little bit darker, darker images are a little bit lighter. Let's take a look at that again. So when we're looking at reflections, there's some things we should know. Another thing that alters the color and the value in the river are cast shadows, meaning the sunlight will hit a tree, the tree will cast a shadow across the water. So here's how you tell the difference. Reflections come straight down from the object casting it. Straight, direct down. And shadows follow the path of the sun. Reflections will never go sideways, but shadows often do. I can't tell you how many times I've seen in student works, students who make their reflections go off to the side, but reflections always come straight down from top to bottom. And shadows always follow the path of the sun. So in this image, you can see there's a lot of things happening, but if you keep that in mind, reflections come down and shadows follow the path of the sun. Then you'll have a pretty good chance of pulling apart the different and dissecting the different visual clues in this photograph for when you're trying to figure out how to paint it. We'll get to that in just a second. The reflected sky, here's another little tool you can use. The reflected sky will usually gradate from light to darker, going from top to bottom of the image. So here's a little me painting just a little sloppy mock-up of light to darker, creating a gradated look of reflected sky. So here's some of those ideas put together. This is the Yakima River in Washington State. The sky reflected in this water is darker. Right here, we see sky reflected, and it's darker than the actual sky. The tree reflections right here are lighter in value than the trees. They're lighter in value than the trees and are directly below them. So you can see that these dark, shadowy trees, the reflection is lighter. Cast shadows right here and here, you can see the cast shadows coming off the trees. They're in line with the sunlight. So they are a different thing altogether than reflections. They're much darker. They're the same darkness as a real shadow, while a reflection is not. And reflections are distorted by ripples in the water. You can see it's not a mirror image of those trees. The water's moving rapidly and changing out the edges, distorting the edges of the reflected image. Here, I did this little thing. I put some rocks in the bottom of a pie plate, and I just took a little video looking straight down, and then I stepped back, and you can see that by changing my angle of looking at the water, I change how the reflections in that water are seen. So here, I've taken a picture of a little stream by my house. The top picture is looking out across the water, and you can see the reflections in the water are quite clear. But when I stand on a little short wall and look down, I'm looking through the water at the bottom. I'm looking at the water's pretty sludgy with all the ducks and geese in it. It's a little slimy. I wouldn't want to swim in it. But you can see the reflections are sort of like that in that pan of water. I'm looking down through the water, so it's not blue and reflective anymore. It's brown from the sand and dirt at the bottom of the little stream. So here's a review. Number one, there's 9 things we want to review that I just said, and I'm putting them all in a row to make it a little more condensed. Dark values reflect a little bit lighter in water in reflections. Light values reflect slightly darker, just slightly. Colors in the reflections are less intense. They're diminished in intensity, but they live in the same color family as the item reflected. Number 4, the reflection of a thing will grow longer and more distorted when the water is choppy. You can see how these chops elongate the reflection of the tree. Number 5, the smoother the water, the more it is a mirror image. Number 6, reflections align and drop straight down, while shadows follow the path of the sun. And number 8, we're almost there. You can take a screenshot of this if you want to. The viewer can usually see the river bottom through shallow water. And that river bottom is seldom blue, just saying. And number 9, reflections are clearer when seen at a little bit of a distance. So here's our 9 takeaways about reflections, and we're going to dig in a little deeper, and we're going to look at some other things that create color in water. And one of those is impurities in the water. As we saw in my little stream picture, rivers can be colored with sediment, runoff, minerals, algae. All kinds of impurities in the water can change the color of the water. And when you add the shallow bottom of the water and any impurities, what you're looking at is water is an imperfect mirror reflecting whatever's above it, but also added to that is whatever is in the water and what's ever below the water. Oh my, how do we ever think to paint this? Well, we'll get to that. But let's take a look at some other things that create color in water. And another item that creates color in water is depth. When viewing bodies of water from above, you can see through them to the rocks below, like my little pie pan. Pure water is clear, but sunlight doesn't penetrate pure water beyond a certain depth. So beyond that point, the molecules of water block out colors. Warm tones are blocked out first, leaving darker, cooler areas, which reveal the depth. So that means that deep water is darker and cooler than shallow water. So let's take a look at this. Here I'm standing on a bridge looking down at a very clean, pure river. And here we can see the shallow water. I wouldn't want to jump off the bridge right here. We can really see that that's shallow. The sunlight is penetrating that little bit of water and bouncing back color. Over here, we can see that the water is a little deeper. In deeper water, the sunlight can penetrate the water, but the color is filtered as it comes back and it appears greenish. And finally, in the deepest water, sunlight can't bounce back and the water is a dark blue-green. So when we look at the picture on the right, we see there is no deepest color, but we can really tell where the water is shallow by the warmth, by the temperature of the color. We can tell where the water is shallow and where the water is deeper. Just by looking at the temperature that we see in the water. When we're looking at really shallow water, the sand and the rocks under the water are wet and often covered in algae or mud, and so they are darker and quite often warmer or greener in color than dry rocks. So when we're looking at this picture, we can easily tell the water is shallow. There's not a lot of reflection on it. There's a little bit back here in this shadow. We can tell it's shallow because we can see those greeny orange rocks. We can tell the rocks are wet because they are darker and warmer. We can tell the rocks off to the right are dry because they are lighter and cooler in temperature. How easy is that? Wet rocks and dry rocks, shallow water. So here's a couple of paintings done by some really great artists showing that difference between shallow and deep water and between things that are underwater and things that are above water. The painting on the right is by John Singer Sargent, and you can see that his rocks are darker warmer and greener in the shallow area. And in the deeper area of the water, towards the center of the painting, he has the greener and darker and bluer. He also has captured that idea of looking across the water, you're getting some reflection. And the same way in the painting on the right by William F. Reese, we can see that some of these logs are half submerged. One of the logs is half out of the water because it's lighter. We can see the rocks that are out of the water and rocks that are half under the water, rocks that are all the way under the water by the temperature and by the value of the color. So here we're looking across the water and we're seeing the reflection. So these two artists have conquered those ideas of shallow to deep, of wet to dry, of looking down and looking across the water. So I'm going to break away from this, my slideshow for a minute. We're going to go over to my easel and we're going to try out something. So if you've got your paints with you, let's give this a try. We're going to try this little bit of shallow to deep water. So I'm going to escape out of here and go to my canvas. Sorry about that. We'll go over to my canvas here. There we are. And what I've done, I'm going to walk right over here. What I've done is I've taken just a little bit of canvas from a pad. Oh, here's the pad. It's a Frederick's canvas pad. And it's actual real, oh, look, I've got all kinds of things on here from before.
Hey, Diana.
Yeah.
Just really quick, no big deal, but I think it also switched your microphone to your computer microphone as well. So if you just want to go back to the StreamYard settings and
switch mic. Okay, sorry.
yeah, so under audio, just change your mic to the same thing.
Oh, for heaven's sake. Okay.
No worries.
Camera audio. Okay, let's see if this works better.
Oh, that's so much better. That's incredible.
Oh my goodness.
That's amazing.
Things changed when I rebooted. Can you hear me now?
Yes, that's fantastic.
So anyway, I'm using some real canvas from my canvas pad. You can see I use this pad a lot for playing around with, but this particular piece had like 2 or 3 paintings on it, and I've gessoed over them. So the texture looks rough. That's because I've gessoed over them. Now I'm going to get out my photo that I did of this with shallower rocks, deeper rocks, and deep water. And I'm just going to try to find those colors. And I'm not going to try to paint the whole painting, but I'm just going to try to find the colors and the brush marks that might indicate those rocks are underwater. So the thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start mixing. And I can see that the water is this beautiful blue-green. This is phthalo blue-green shade. And I have Darylite yellow here. You can use your cadmium yellow, medium, whatever yellow you have. I chose this because it's a nice warm yellow. Now I've got a blue-green here, and it seems to be too dark. So I'm adding a little white to it. Now it seems way too blue. So I'm going to add a little yellow to it until I get it. Here I'm going to add some ultramarine, darken it up so that I get a nice dark blue-green for that deep water. Oh my, I just got paint all over my nose. Oh well, when you see me again, I will have blue paint all over my nose. Oh dear. Um, well, just another little technical difficulty. So here I'm looking at a lighter blue green here. And you know what I noticed this week, I was trying to project these images on a little laptop I have, and the colors for every computer screen are a little bit different. So I just wanted to throw that out. If you're looking at these colors on your screen, you might be looking at something a little different. But if you create a blue green and then a lighter blue green and then a lighter, warmer, here I'm going to make an orangey green. So first I have to get an orange. For some of these rocks that are even closer, we'll create an orangey green. There we go. So whatever colors you have, we're going to create a color harmony rather than trying to match the colors so much. Because matching is just simply matching either a computer screen or at this point a printout, and those can be inaccurate. What I'm doing is I'm mixing a little purple because this purple is going to enter some of the darker parts, and I'm mixing my ultramarine and phthalo together. That purple is going to enter some of the darker parts of this. Now my rocks, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on. I'm just going to mix up a warmish. There was a little purple on my mixing thing, and I'm adding a little bit of orange here. They're very light in the sunlight, so I'm just making this sort of grayish warm color. Now, let's put some color down. I did not put a wash on here. If I was going to do that, I might put in a soft brown or a soft purple. So let's just mix up a soft brown, and I'll put a wash under there. It won't dry. So red, yellow, and blue mixed together make brown. And in this case, it's just a warm brown. And I'm popping this on here. You don't have to have an underwash. You certainly don't. And people ask me all the time, why do you choose this color over that color? Or, why is your underwash this? A lot of it is just, that's what I felt like it should be under there. I don't know why, honestly, but I am just going to wipe it back a little bit. So this color, because this color doesn't have time to dry. And I'm going to wipe back where the lighter rocks are going to go. I'm pushing this up. I don't want to put those dark green trees in here right now, because I'm doing a little color study. I just want to find out if the colors for my water are going to be what I want. Now I'm looking at the color that I have here, and I think it's too cold. So I'm adding a little bit more yellow to it, because this water is very green, and I'm just checking out. I'm putting where the deep water is in my composition. It's not really a composition because I'm just testing out. I'm using this little piece of canvas to test out some colors. Now I'm going to test out the color I have for my lighter green, the rocks that are sort of midway buried underwater. And then I'll kind of go into a little bit of something for those reflections. Let's get a little bit of violet-y color. For some of these reflections I'm seeing coming down are quite warm, and I'm just going to put them in. Oops, I've got to cover those up again. I got green in them. That's all right. Okay, let me try out some of these other colors. I'm going to lighten a little bit. Some of them are lighter. I think these rocks under here were really white rocks hiding under the water. Now they get wider as they get closer and narrower as they go further back. Where there's a little deeper place between the rocks, it gets darker. So I'm just looking at, oh, and their edges are blurry because there's water flowing over them. So I'm just thinking about all these different things that are happening as I lay these colors in. And again, I'm not going to try to paint this as a finished piece. I just want to see what the colors look like side by side. Are these the colors I would like to see in my painting? Are these the colors that I feel work for this painting? Here's the lighter greeny yellow, and I'm going to make them lighter still. Greeny, orangey, warmer rocks that are in the shallows. Little lines between the rocks. Another way I could have done that would have been to painted this whole thing dark and then put the lighter, here, I'll do it over here, and then put the lighter rocks on top so that those marks become negative spaces. Let's see. So one of the reasons for doing this whole thing like this is to find out, is this good, and how can I make it better? How can I experiment with these ideas? So I've got a little bit of a darker bit there, and I want a brighter green, a brighter, lighter green. So I'm just going to go right over that darker bit. And then I'm going to find some of those reflection colors, and we'll move on. So here's what I do when I'm exploring some ideas. If I have never, for instance, painted a reflection or a rock underwater before, I'm going to try a bunch of different things. I'm going to get out some practice paper, and I'm just going to start goofing around with my colors and with my shapes until I find something that really resonates, that really seems to be what I'd like to have it look like. So as I'm going in here, you know, I'm trying things on top, I'm trying things underneath, I'm trying things negative shape, I'm trying to put lighter over darker. I want to mix up make sure that I don't have my edges too hard, because it's all water is flowing over all of this. So I want to make sure that I have really soft edges. Here's some reflections. Oh, lighter. I'm going to keep my reflections of light things a little bit darker. So of these light rocks, I'll keep the reflection a little bit darker. And when I get to the shadows in the rocks, I'll make those reflections a little bit lighter. And I'm using my finger to soften some edges. The darkest part seems to be right through here and up here. And then I'm going to make a dark color for the shadows in the rocks. And I'm not putting them in the right place at all. I'm just marking them in so I can see what those shadows look like in my overall color harmony. Do I like this? That's a huge thing in painting is, do I like this? Do I like this? If I don't, it's back to the drawing board. And that's one of the reasons we get so caught up in trying to make everything perfect the first time. And a lot of people feel like if they don't get their painting perfect the first time, that, you know, I'm going to give up. But you know what? It's worth another try. Here we go. I'm going to get some of these shapes in here and then get some of that really rich dark green up here. And see how that looks with the reflected green down below. Now this is just a color study. I think this blue is too blue right there. That blue shadow, way too blue. But I can fix that. Those things are easy. What I also want to notice is that right at the edge of the water, and I'm going to switch to a smaller brush. I have this teeny tiny little brush. It's like a number 0. I'm just going to use this little brush to get some dark by the edge of the water. Right where the water line is hitting the rocks and making the rocks wet and creating a shadow under the rocks. There's this really dark moment. And I'm going to practice that a little bit too. Where does it happen? And as soon as I have my color study done, I'm going to go back to our slides and we're going to look at some ideas for reflections, for painting reflections in water, for getting movement in water. So I'm not going to spend our whole time fooling around with this one. I'm just making some reflections coming this direction. I'm definitely not going to spend all my time messing around with this color study because I want so much more. There's so many more things to talk about in rivers and streams, and this one is just getting the depth. Finding shallow water, finding deep water, finding a color harmony that works. So I'm laying my brush on the side to get some smaller, lighter marks of these, and then I'm going to lay it flatter to get wider marks where the rocks are coming more forward. I'm going to get some of this warm color with this greeny orange for where some of the rocks are even more forward and they're lighter. Look right there and right here. And you can see now, you can start to see where things are coming forward and where things are going back in space. Not entirely yet, but we're just experimenting with ways we can create this depth in the water. So I'm certainly having fun with this. And I also know that if I were to paint this for real, I'm going to come up with a strategy in this from this little piece. There we go. That's warmer. I'm going to come up with a strategy in this small piece that will help me get through the bigger piece. And to tell you the truth, I did paint this larger, and I'm going to the other day because I was trying hard. Let's see if I can find the painting. Well, maybe it's not here. Uh-oh. Oh, yeah, here it is. I did paint it larger. Here it is. But when I painted it, I was looking at a different computer screen and it was bluer. I prefer this greener color, to tell you the truth. And I also started to figure out ways in which I could get the depth in between the stones. And for all of us, as we paint, we have to come up with strategies. How are you going to figure out the little swirls across the reflections? How are you going to figure out there's some little rocks back over here in shallow, right at the edge of the water here. And they're light. How are you going to figure these things out? What are you going to do? What are your strategies going to be? That's the way we come as an artist. Now, you can follow mine, and that's fine. And then as you follow mine, you'll come up with your own, which is part of what this is about, is finding your way through this, coming up with your own ideas. So I'm going to let this stop for a minute. I'm really loving this color. I still think it's a little too blue as I'm looking at my image, and then I've got a little too much contrast here. It breaks up my depth. So if it's too blue, I need to add a little more yellow to it. If it's too dark, I need to lighten it a little bit, just a little bit. If the rocks are too similarly shaped and sized, then I need to break those up. But one of the things that I love about this is that there's no judgment here. It's just what is going to be the solution for you? What is going to be the way that you get through this? Now, I like a nice, almost semi-abstract-y image. I really like Impressionism. I like to get a look of real, but then I also like it to be really abstracted as well. So I'm happy with not a lot of tight brush marks. Other people would be really unhappy with it and be uncomfortable with that. And so for you, it would be better to go in with some tighter brush marks. If you are that person. And again, it's just all about what we individually like as artists, what we want to see as artists, what we want to see in our painting. And so that's where I'm going, is just these studies help us get to where we'd like to eventually be. So I'm putting this aside now. It's really hard to put aside. I want to keep going until it's done. But I'm going to flip over to our slideshow again, because there's so much more to look at. So here we go. I'm going to go back to our slideshow, and here we go. And if anyone has questions, please ask. I'm happy to answer. So we're going to look a little closer at ripples and moving water in streams. As we saw before, water that is absolutely smooth is a perfect mirror. As soon as you drop that rock into the stream, you're going to distort the mirror image. Here, I've thrown the rock in. This was actually me throwing a rock in and then taking the picture. You can see that these rings go out from where I threw the rock in perspective. smaller, shorter, tighter together distortions and rings in the back, and wider, broader, more open distortions and rings in the front. Moving or rough water creates a really distorted image. So we're going to look at some strategies of how you might go about trying to make that distorted image in just a minute. But first, let's talk about why this happens. When you're looking at smooth water, the image bounces directly onto the water, bounces directly back into your eye, and you're seeing there's all kinds of sciencey terms for the angles of this, and I don't want to get into that because it's not necessary for you to understand that that smooth mirror image is going to bounce back one very clear image back to you. But if the image is bumpy, part of the wave is facing one direction, and part of that wave or bump or ripple is facing the other direction. So everything facing that direction will receive reflections from over there, from over to the left. Everything facing to the right is going to receive reflections from over here and the right, and creating this green, blue, yellow distorted image of what you're seeing. Lots and lots and lots of little distorted mountains and sunshines. Here's an example of how you might be able to think about painting this. Number one, in the background, you're going to see some different colors, but you're going to use smaller, choppier horizontal strokes to create them. In the foreground, you're going to use larger, wider strokes to create them. You can see where the choppy water has distorted the image of the dog and the rower. Those colors are in here. But even as I move my cursor around, I can feel the directional strokes of the water. Here again, in the background, further away, just like those rings going away, the further back you go, there are smaller horizontal strokes. And the closer you get, you're going to get larger, wider strokes. That's just a matter of perspective and creating that larger to smaller thing from foreground to back. Here's a couple of really great artists, and this is how they've dealt with that water distortion and ripple effect. This is acrylic artist John Hammond. He's British. And you can see he uses the larger, wider strokes. All the colors are here, but the images are distorted. And he's done that other thing, which is made the darker part a little lighter, made the lighter parts a little darker. But you can see he's used wider strokes in the foreground and smaller, thinner, more horizontal strokes in the back. Even here in the left-hand picture where he used more dots and dabs of color, they are larger and wider in the foreground, and they are closer together in value and smaller and thinner as he goes back in space. Here's two more paintings by the same artist. And you can see the distortion he created in these trees by wiggling the distortion. But as he goes back in space, as he gets further back in the image, the ripples are more horizontal, and they're smaller and thinner. As they come forward, they're more open, they're larger, they're more flowing and moving. The brush marks are flowing and moving with the rhythm of the water. Let's take a look at another artist. Here's Claude Monet. And in here, he does the same thing. Open, wide ripples and distortions in the foreground and smaller horizontal brush marks in the back. It's pretty interesting, and it's a good way to think about how you might attack this idea of ripples in the water. Here's a more detail-oriented artist, Winslow Homer, and he does the same thing. Take a look. Wider, more open ripples in the foreground, smaller, thinner, narrower, more horizontal ripples in the back. So we're looking at the difference between this. These two photos were taken on the same day on the same river. And in one part of the river, it was running very smoothly, and there was a mirror image. In another part of the river, which was also very shallow, there was a little breeze picked up, and the river was moving a little more swiftly, and the image was distorted. But you can see the same thing: wider, more open shapes in the foreground, thinner, smaller, more horizontal shapes in the back. The other thing that distorting water does, or rough water does, is it elongates and stretches the reflection. Here, the reflection is just about as tall as the thing reflecting it. Over here, the reflections stretch all the way from top to bottom, because each little ripple creates another reflection, so it's reflecting all the way down across the surface of the water. So the other thing ripples do is stretch the reflection out and make it longer than it otherwise would be. So I'm going to move over to my test thing again. I have these two images, and we're going to look at two strategies for creating reflections. One is a smoother reflection, and one is a more rippled and bumpy reflection. And again, I'm not going to try to paint the whole painting. I'm just going to see and experiment with ways that I can create this effect of a smoother, more gentle reflection, and that reflection that's bouncing across bigger waves. So here we go. I'm going to exit out of here and go back to my canvas. Sorry about the millions of little pictures here, but I'm going to go back to my canvas for another look. We're going to work on the smooth reflections of the trees in autumn and of the moon and the lights on the Willamette River. So I'm going to, here we go. This is just about dry. Good. I'm going to flip this over so I have two shapes that are upright. I'm going to try to use this same palette, and we'll see what I can come up with. So the first one I'm going to do, let's see, can we see that whole thing? Let me pull it down. This first one I'm going to do is this night one with reflections. So I'm going to start with some orange. And I'm going to make, let's see, here's going to be the edge of the water and the land. Here we go. Just going to sketch that out. And I'm just going to start putting some orange. I mixed my Darylite yellow and my quinacridone magenta together. Here's where my moon is. And there's another little light up here. Don't worry, I'm going to get lighter and darker, but I have to start somewhere. So I'm starting with these colors. There's another smaller, couple little ones over here. Now inside that, I'm going to put some yellow and add a little white to the yellow to lighten it up a bit and make it more opaque. There we go. And then I'll add even lighter stuff to it. I want that orange to be more spread out, diffused. And then I want that yellow to be more spread out and diffused. Because I'm still going to get lighter still. And then what I'm going to do is bring my dark colors and I'm going to go back in over these as soon as I get this feeling of lighter to, of the lights dissipating across. So hang in with me for just a minute. And while this is still wet, oh, I should put my gloves on. That is always a good idea when I've got my computer right there, because then I have wet paint on my hands and I can touch my computer and really not a good idea. So I'm going to do this. Just put some gloves on to make sure I don't have wet paint all over my hands when I go back. Because we still have, besides ripples, we're still going to look at how moving water works, what we do about moving water. But right now, I just want to deal with these little ripples. I'm going to mix up some, here's a nice light blue that I mixed up before. I think it's just phthalo and a touch of ultramarine with white. And I'm going to use this for my sky color in just a minute. I'll get a lighter version and a little bit lighter version, a little bit darker version. And then also for my water, I'm going to get a little bit darker version still. Now for the land, I can see that it's a greenish color, but it's really softened with some orange. So I've just mixed up some orange with the red and yellow over here and added it to that green to soften the color up. Oh, that's a good color. I like that color. I didn't pre-think this one through. So I didn't do a preliminary painting. I'm just doing this with you together to see how this is going to come together. So I'm going to let some of this stuff dry just a little bit. I'm going to take my darker color. I'm using this wide brush on this little 8x10. And I like it turned on its side. But I think I have a little bit of water in there. I don't want water in my brush, so I'm going to squeegee that out. I don't want my paint to be watery, because that's going to pick up the color underneath. And is this the right way to go about it? Well, gee, I don't know. That's why I'm experimenting. Is there a perfect way of doing this? Well, gee, I don't know. You can join me on this adventure, just like on my mini challenge, just warts and all. We're just going to do a little discovery here of how we might proceed through this. I might come back with some of these ripples too. We'll see. Now, on a bigger painting, these might be even better. Let's see. Little bit, it's still really rich up here. And soft edges. So what I'm doing is I'm just bringing these colors straight down, smudging them in, and then I'll come back with more defined ripples in a minute. Looks like a duck or a boat or something went through here and made a darker line. It looks like a great big mess right now. We'll see what we can do. So Peter, if anyone has questions, just shout them out here.
Sounds good. Somebody asked Diane, why don't you use one of the colors of the actual painting as the toning color?
Well, I could. And that would be another experiment that I'm doing. I could actually use that bright orange to tone the whole thing. I chose not to tone it this time because there wasn't enough time to let it dry. But it's a really good idea to do that. Like that orange color would be an excellent idea to use that as a toning color. And so that is like the purpose of this. I could do a whole nother one of these, which I won't, but I could do a whole nother of these to see if toning it would be a better idea. And, and if I liked that idea, I could try it bigger and see if bigger would be a better idea. Right now, I'm just working on finding some patterns. Smaller, we're going to go really small back here. Those smaller to larger, bringing them all the way down. And then I'm going to come back in with the bright little pops of light and completely change this up with bright little pops of light. So I'm seeing some little purpley smudges back here. And then I'm going to pop in the sky, and then I will see about going from smaller to bigger. And, these experiments, if I were doing a demo, I would have already worked out how I was going to do all this because it is difficult. This is not easy. These experiments are just that. Here we go. Hopefully the sky is a little drier so it doesn't turn green on me. But I wanted that aura. think I'm going to put a little bit of purple here around this to create that aura around these lights. And one of the things I don't want to do with a light is make it a hard edge, because lights, then it won't look like the light is beaming out. It'll just look like a nut, like a solid little nut sitting in the sky. Okay, once I get it to just a little bit of a space that I'd like, I'm going to try some stuff. Okay, try some stuff here. And one of the things is I'm going to soften these, and then I'm going to add the sparkle and the highlight. I'm going to get this much darker at the base and then segue that color up. And I can see the bigger marks coming down, and then they get smaller and softer going up. So I've only ever done this effect on a big canvas. I've never done it on a little canvas. So we're all in this together here.
Another question. What kind of gloves does Dianna use for painting?
Oh, these are, let's see, they're just nitrile gloves I got on Amazon. And they're just to protect my computer from all of this mess. Because my hands get really messy when I'm demoing. Well, they get really messy when I'm painting. And then, but I don't want to transfer that mess over to my computer. But they're great if you're a really messy painter like me. They're fantastic. So here I'm coming back with a little bit of a lighter color. And I'm trying to find the rhythm of the wider movement. So I'm going to let this dry because I want to do a little dry brushing over it. And I'm going back and forth between my blue and my orange now to find these movements, to find these little patterns. And then right in the center of these things here, I'm going to put a little white glow. So white. And I see a lot of orange glow in the water. And one of the things is to try to keep from having hard edges in all these ripples. So a good dry brush means you don't have any water in your bristles. You pick up some paint and you're going to drag it. It's like a dragged thing. And it'll drag across and leave little sparkles behind. And anywhere I'm seeing hard edges, I'm going to come back in and just brush them out and then put in my next layer of color. And what's fun here is that I'm seeing some other colors too. So I'm putting them in like purples, little dabs of this and that. And so on this little 8x10, I'm starting to feel like I'm getting a feel for it. It's not happening yet, but I'm starting to get the feel of it. And again, we're going to go pretty quickly here because I have 2 more little demos to do before we're done. But to find this rhythm, and then I'm going to save the brightest sparkles till the end for when this is dry.
Katie
Smaller,
Wolf
thinner.
asks, how do you paint blue over yellow and vice versa and not get green?
You have to let it dry, but there's a secret if the paint is wet, and that is if you paint thicker paint over thinner paint. So whenever I'm going over a thinner paint, or whenever I'm going over a color that I need to cover, excuse me, I'm going to pick up thicker paint on my paintbrush. So it covers, instead of picks up what's underneath, it'll cover what's underneath. And
Awesome,
that's sometimes hard to do, picking up a thicker gob. So here's the technique: rinse your brush, dry it really, really well. Mix up a nice, no water in it. If there's any water in it at all, it will pick up what's underneath. And then just lay it on. There are some areas where it has turned green, and I'm not going to worry about it. And I'll tell you why. Because later I can go over any color I don't like and I can change it. That's one of the cool things about acrylic painting, is you don't have to stay with anything you don't like. You can change anything and everything to be something you like better. So, and you know, there are people who ask me, well, isn't that going to be overworking? That depends, you know. What overworking is shooting way past your goal, is taking your painting and shooting way past what your goal for it was until it's just a hard-edged thing. Now, because my goal for my painting is to be softer and have more brushwork, if I keep painting until everything's a hard little edge, I know I've overworked it. But I'm not going to stop painting until I achieve the effect that I want. So there's those 2 ideas, which are that keep people from finishing their painting, is they're afraid to overwork, or they stop having a goal in mind for their painting, and then they do overwork. So having a goal of what you want your work to look like. I mean, so when I'm demoing, my goal is just to not mess it up so bad that nobody can understand what I just did. That's my main goal when I'm demoing. To tell you the truth, I like to keep it within that goal. But when I'm doing work for myself, I have very different goals in mind. I have a surface texture I want to achieve. I have a color harmony I want to achieve. I'm going these little teeny tiny thin. I'm thinking of that Monet painting, and I'm also seeing how these beams are getting thinner and smaller as they're coming down here. So I want to get those thinner and smaller. The Monet painting I'm thinking of was that Impression Sunrise, where it was just little dabs. So I'm thinking of that as I go here. And I'm going to get those last little dazzles. If at any time I feel like my colors are not achieving the effect I want, I can go back to my paint box and get some more colors out. The reason I stay really, really within a tight color harmony is it's so much easier to have a beautiful harmonious painting at the end if I stay within a tight color harmony. But if those colors aren't working, I'm in charge. I'm the artist. I'm in charge, and I can go back and pick out a different color if I like. Pick out a, if I need to make a dark blacky color, I might reach in, and this color right here is anthraquinine blue. It's not on the list, but I have it up here. If I need to make a black, it is a beautiful dark color, and it makes a beautiful black. And there's no rules. There's no law against doing whatever you need to do to make your painting work. So for me, this is starting to be and have the feeling I want it to have. The water should be a little darker, and some of these should be thinner. So I'm going to do that, make my water a little darker. And in doing so, I'm going to thin out some of these strokes. Dry brush across these with little thin strokes. And then my study, in this study, I'm going to say I've kind of figured out what I would like to figure out for this painting, for the larger painting that I'm going to do from this study. Now, when I go out plein air painting, I do a lot of these little studies, not finished works, not intended to be finished works at all. They're just intended to be a way of seeing how I can work my way through the image and seeing what works and doesn't work for my image. And if I find a big, sort of ugly boo-boo, I can fix it in my finished painting. That saying, I used to, when, years ago when I'd go plein air painting, I had a big van, and I would do like 3 foot by 4 foot plein air paintings out on location, but I'd always do a little study first before I launched into that much paint. Now this whole thing was done with little marks going sideways. This whole business in the water was trying to follow the movement. Now I'm going to switch this up, and I'm going to move over to our autumn scene. I'm going to let this dry. I'm going to put in a few little dry brush marks in a minute, but I'm going to switch over to our autumn scene. Here we go. And in this one, I want to really explore the reflected area. So I'm not going to put the whole scene on here again. My area, I'm just using a little colored pencil to kind of draw in what I'd like to explore here. these rocks, this color in the water. Oops, a little bit further over. I want to explore this area of, you know, the image. And so what I'm seeing though is that the trees are very light and bright up above. Here, I'll show on here. These trees are very light and bright. When I'm looking at the reflected image, they are not as light and bright. There's a lot of, if you look carefully, there's some gray and gray violet underbrush. And then there's a bluish area that's reflecting these hills up top. So I'm going to mix up a variety of colors in that grayish underbrush. I'm just mixing my purple color with a little bit of yellow on my brush and create a little bit more red, a warmish gray underbrushy color. Now I've got this really bright yellow orange from my Darolite yellow. I have a darkish, bluish, greenish color that I will make not quite so bright by adding a little bit of purple to it. All right. And then I have the gray of the stones, which are lighter and slightly warmer. So I'm mixing a gray for the stones with my purple color. There's a little bit of my magenta in here. There's a tiny touch of green. All those colors mixed together are going to make a nice, soft gray tone. And then I have some rich orange colors. So orange color right here. Orange, the lighter yellow. So I'm going to mark in where my little rock banks go. And again, I'm not putting an underwash on this, although I could. A darker underwash or a more lavender underwash would be really beautiful under here. And so maybe I will take my darker lavender color and thin it with just a drop of water. And I'm just going to run it down through here. And it's thin, so it should dry pretty quickly. But I want to make these brush marks long and smooth and vertical. And I'll show you why in just a second. I am now going to take this color, this same color, or a similar one, and put some of this underbrush color up in here. Then the trees are in, some of these trees are in shadow as they start to go up, and then they get lighter and warmer as they rise. So I'm just mushing all these colors together in the beginning, and I will separate them out later. And again, the underwash is almost less important than getting the values, temperatures, intensities of the paint colors correct. So I'm going to work on value, temperature, intensity. I'm just going to suggest some of the values back here because I really, really want to focus on this water. When I squint, I can see that the water around the edge of this little bar of gravel is slightly darker than the gravel. So I'm making this underwash slightly darker. And I'm establishing these colors so that I can see how to make the colors in the reflection a little darker. And I'm going to now I'm going to start dragging down some color. I want to get more of this purpley color down here. This is going to get covered up with a different color. So just want to cover it up. All right. I'm going to take my darker orange and I'm just going to drag it through here, going downward. I'm going to take my magenta-y purple, my magenta purple gray color, whatever color that is, and I'm going to drag it through. I'm going to take my greenish color, drag it through. And this is not the end of this. Now I'm going to take that orange color again. I'm seeing it. I'm going to build up to the lighter colors by dragging this through. I hope you're having a fun time with me today. I'm sure having a great time painting. And let's see, I want this further down, so that's all right. I got thrown a little bit by the technical difficulties, but I feel like we've conquered. So here I'm making this more browny color. I'm just working on these darker colors for a moment, and then I'm going to come back with the lighter. Did I already say that? I think I already said that. All right. Remembering that reflections drop straight down from the thing reflecting it. Now, get a little bit brighter. And before I get too lost in all this stuff, I'm going to do something else. Look at my hand shaking. I'm going to go sideways, distorting this colors a little bit. Should be another pass of an orange color through here. So I'm kind of taking these down and across. Let me get that orange color down here. Now I'm going to go over this with another color. There we go, bluer. And we'll get to some of these. This is a very long, this kind of an image might take a long time to bring to fruition, but we're working here. I'm going to create this soft, it's not really blue, it's a cloudy, it's sort of cloudy or shady on the water there. So it's a little bit purpley. And very light. And I'm dragging it to create those soft riffles. It is lighter. It's going to have to be lighter than the rocks. So after the first pass, I'm putting a lot of white in here because it has to be. When I look at it and squint my eyes, it's lighter than the rocks. So I need to lighten this up and maybe darken the rocks as well. So my, oops, darker and a little bit warmer. My two-prong attack here is to darken the rocks a little bit and to lighten the water. There's still going to be some lighter reflections in here, but you can see how rich this is already starting to become. I'm going to darken this by the water because the water reflections are lighter than the stones. And up here at the top of this little bar, the stones are lighter than the water. So as I kind of talk my way through this, I'm trying to show you what my thinking is. Okay, there is some very light, like the water is ruffled up down here. So it's dancing across some stones right there. And when I drag it, it kind of creates a little bit of a feeling of movement. There's some orangey plants growing here. And on the beach, a strange magenta-y colored underbrush stuff. How are you doing? Are you holding in there with me? Are you in these little studies? Are you finding it hard to deal with, or are you finding it easy and freeing to not have to be perfect? That's my question for you. In doing studies, I find it both to be easy and freeing and to be hard not to be perfect. I'm being pretty hard on myself, wanting this to be perfect, but I also want to find how I would do this on a real painting, on a bigger painting.
Yeah, Diana, people are really enjoying this. Lois Reed says, I've been painting for 39 years, but I've learned so much today.
Oh, thank you, Lois. That is so sweet. I love that. The main purpose of me doing this workshop today is to help us to understand there are so many things going on in water that we can identify. If we can identify them, we can paint them. It's really hard to paint something that we can't identify. Our brains just seek to understand. And once we understand what's happening, it's maybe a little easier to identify what we can do, how we can paint. See, I'm still using this big brush on this little 8x10. And I'm feeling like this is starting to become like a really rich reflection here. I've put one little stone here that I see its reflection. I'm smushing its reflection out a little bit. I'll put another little stone. I don't want to get too rocky because I don't want to mess up this reflection too much. And I will move to a smaller brush just for a minute and get this darker color, because some of the stones have a little bit of dark under them, and that helps them set. Remember how we were setting things at the water's edge? Well, we can just put a little bit of dark at the base of these things, and not like a solid line, because it wouldn't be a solid line. There's all kinds of little irregularities happening. But just every so often, there's a little dark mark at the water's edge that helps us identify where the water is touching the rocks and where the rocks are getting wet underneath. So that's all I'm doing there. And then I'm going to put a little bit of, some of these rocks are going to have a little lighter tone. So not all of them. If I did all of them, it would look like confetti. And I don't want to mess up the feeling of this reflection with confetti. So I see a really, really warm, almost magenta-y, orangey color in here that I would like to add to the richness of this reflection. And then I'm going to move on really quick, back up to here for a moment, and add a couple of those little dry brush marks. If it's okay with you, I'm really hoping to find, because I was quite unsatisfied with my painting thus far. So I really was hoping to find some of those dazzling little dry brush marks that'll really say reflection. So again, the dry brush, you rinse all the color out of your brush and dry it off. Look at my hands. Oh my goodness. Yay, gloves. And then I'm going to take some of this lightened up yellow. I'm going to practice on the edge, just get some of that paint off of there so I can come by through here and just get some of these little dry brushy marks through some of this reflection. And I'm not a big fan of canvas, but in this case, these little marks are grabbing onto the edges of the canvas and making little speckles. I'm going to do the same thing with the blue. Just dry brush it across to make the little speckles of light show through. And then up here, I got a little hard-edged on that light. So I'm just going to come back in. And let that light glow out a little bit. Now, once I've decided that I like a technique, that I finally kind of zeroed in on something that I love, I might just be tempted to write it down or to hurry quickly to my larger canvas so that I don't forget what it was I was trying to accomplish. It would be so easy to forget. So I can also just flip this over and write down what I've done. Just say, remember the dry brush, remember what didn't work, remember to bloom those lights out. Um, on just write it down so you don't forget what it is that was important to you. All right. How much time do we have left, Peter? I'm completely
We got probably like 10 minutes.
okay. 10 minutes will do. I'm going to come back to my slide presentation real quick. Use up another. And we're going to just look at moving water really fast here. I'm going to go to my slides, so it's going to look weird for a minute. And let's look at moving water. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about the anatomy of moving water. We've talked about ripples going from large to small and finding the color. When the ripple moves one way, it's one color. When the ripple faces the other way, it's another color. But what happens when water starts foaming up? When water starts falling and foaming is a different matter. So we're going to take a look. First of all, here's our deep water again, and it's not really foaming, but it's moving, and you can really see some lines of movement. And water doesn't just go in a straight line. It kind of curls back on itself, sort of like this a little bit. So you're going to get lines of movement, and then it's going to eddy backwards and curl a little bit backwards. So as you find these movements, also remember that if the water isn't directly sparkling in the sunlight or directly foaming up from having crashed over a rock, these little lines of movement aren't going to be white. So don't paint them white or they'll look weird. See, there's little flecks of light where the bits of water are catching sunlight, but these lines of movement are actually a soft gray. And we'll look at that in just a minute. So here we've got some water falling over rocks in two places. And I just want to talk about the anatomy of this for a minute. We're looking out across the water and we can see a reflection. We can also see where the water is almost orange right here. If you can see my cursor, it's hard. In the upper right, the water looks almost orange because it's shallow. It's shallowing up. It's getting deeper right here where it's about to crash over these rocks. The rocks create a 3D effect. There is a shadow on the front side of every rock and a cast shadow. And the water, as it hits into the sunlight, foams up into white. But it also, there are foamy bits underneath. Take a look. Right, I don't know if you can see my cursor. It's right in the middle. The water's starting to foam up. The water gets really deep right here because it's fallen over those rocks and kind of gouged out a little hole. So it's greener, more blue-green right here. Look over on the right side. It's gunky algae colored because it's really shallow right before it's falling over these stones. So as you think about the anatomy of each thing, look at even the stone in the water has a little shadow. So think about the anatomy of these things. Don't let it frighten you and don't let it dissuade you from going at this. But just remember, some things are under the water. They'll be blue-green. Some things are on top of the water. They'll be white. The water is stretching over some of these rocks, so they won't be blue or green or white. They'll be the color of wet rocks because the water has stretched itself over the top of some of the rocks, and you can't really see the water except for the fact that the rock is wet and there's a few sparkles. So here is a little thing we're going to work on for the end of this period. And we can see that the water is moving outward in a direction. It's also going in perspective. So what I want us to look at is the direction the water is flowing. Each of these little flow marks is sort of twirling its way outward, but going in the direction of the flow of the water, which is also flowing in perspective out in a single line across here. We can see that the water, as it tilts, as it turns, is catching a reflection in a going a different way, because this area right here where my cursor is in the upper right is tilting downward. The water is starting to catch a different reflection. Isn't this fun? It's so much fun. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. Once you see it and you know it's there, and you learn to dissect it. So each rock has a shadowed side and a lit side. Each rock has an area that's a little bit wet. You can see the water sparkling on the wet side. Rocks where the water, here over in the middle right-hand side, my cursor is circling a rock that's very dark because it's wet. And you can tell it's wet. It has these little sparkles on it. Part of it's dry, so there's a darker and a lighter aspect to that rock. This is so much fun. So here I've kind of torn apart. It's the same image, just I've closed in on it, and I've torn apart some of the color harmonies and the beautiful full color harmonies off to the right. Let's take a look. I've pulled this color from the shallow water above, where the water's getting really shallow as it's starting to stretch out over these rocks. Here I've taken the color of the cast shadow from the rock. There's a rock that's blocking the sun, and there's a cast shadow right on the water. It's that beautiful purple blue color. This is a soft, almost teal gray that I pulled from the color of the sparkles, the color of the foam that's still underneath the surface of the water. This sort of softly warm beige color is the color of this rock that's wet, that has water stretched over the top of it as it begins to dazzle down. Now we can see all these little sparks are going to help us know that that's a wet rock. And finally, we have this beautiful blue-green color of the water in the ripples, where part of the ripple is tilted away. Then we have a green color where part of the ripple is tilted the other direction. But these are the beautiful colors that we might think of mixing up if we were to do this painting. So here's moving water. I say on here, let's try it. I think I've just about run out of time for doing this painting, but I am going to mix up some of those colors over on my easel, or over on my palette, excuse me. So I'm going to jump out of here and go back to my canvas. Sorry about all the mess. Here's my canvas, and this final image up in the upper left corner of my canvas. Here we're just gonna mix up some colors of the moving water. And I'm going to try for some of those subtle, soft colors with my palette here. Now, I've messed this palette up pretty completely. So I have a solution. And I'm only going to take 5 minutes because that's about all we've got here. I've got a solution. I have this paper plate. I'm just going to stick it right there. And mix some of my colors on this paper plate. So this beautiful blue-green, and then there's a beautiful green. I'm going to try my phthalo again for this blue-green. I'm not going to bother with the gloves again because I'm not going to be touching the computer as much. And I want to get going here. So here's blue and yellow. We're going to make a blue-green out of that. It's too dark, so I'm going to lighten it and warm it. Let's take a look at that color. Ooh, I really like that color. That's beautiful. That's phthalo, derylite yellow, and a little bit of white. Now for the green, there's a soft green. Here I'm taking a little bit of orange. There's a soft, darker green ripple. And I made it soft, but I think I have to make the blue-green a little lighter so there's a contrast. So I just took a little white. There we go. That made the blue-green a little softer, and the deeper green look a little darker. Let's try for some of this. I'm seeing a purple, a blue-violet color. I'm taking my ultramarine and phthalo together with a touch of this magenta. Maybe a little bit more. The reason I put phthalo in there is because phthalo's in my greens and I don't want it to be too far apart from my greens. Now, when I squint, it's about the same value as this blue-green. So I'm going to try to make it the same value. There we go. I'm seeing it over to the edge here. So here's the color I'm seeing here. Oh, that's so pretty. Now the color of the foam, the underneath foam was a gray-green. So I'm just going to lighten up my blue-green. And the way to gray that is to take a little bit of the purple and just add a little bit of the purple to it. Lighten it up. It was quite a white, gray, light gray-green underneath the foamy parts, underneath where the water is white. So I'm getting that gray-green underneath the foamy parts. And then the foam can be a bright white right on top. And it's following, remember that it's coming down, but it's also curls back on itself. So you can have a lot of fun with your brush marks, your strokes. This is a time to really shine with your colors. There's so much subtle color going on in here. I'm going to mix a dark. And a dark, I'm going to have to use my two darkest, my ultramarine and phthalo together with my red and just a touch of yellow. That's going to make a really dark color. And I'm thinking of that rock, the shadow of that big rock. And then here I'm mixing some orange with the red and yellow and making it brown by putting a little bit of that blue color in there. So where it turns under and is wet, we have this turning plane. And then where it turns up towards the sun and is a little drier, remember it's much lighter where it's dry. And white is a cool color, so it cools it off naturally. Now that's not the right shape, but that is about the right size. So remember we saw that little bit of shadow in the water. So I'm mixing up some ultramarine blue. It was a really ultramarine-y shadow in the water as the water dropped down. And more white foam above it. You're not going to be able to see white on white, but it's there. There's a little warm rock behind it and a little bit darker where the water comes over it. So now we can see that foamy stuff. So I am about out of time, and I did work on this painting. And I liked most of it, but I'll tell you what I didn't like. I didn't like, number one, I worked on it from my old computer and everything was too blue. But I also didn't like the size and shape of this big globby sandbar. It just looked really awful in my painting. But I'm going to show it to you anyway, because it's good to see people's failures as well as their successes. So here was my first take on this when I was using the image that was a little too blue. And so your homework will be to take one of or all of these 4 reference photos, do some little color studies, do some little studies on how you might solve the problem of foam dropping water, sparkling reflection, soft reflection, or submerged stones and deep and shallow water. See if you can take one of these images or all of them, do some little studies, and see what you can come up with. I would love to see you post your finished paintings, and I will do the same. I did finish, actually, the one that I liked of all the 3 that I painted was I finished this one, and I liked this one. And so why don't you, here, I'll hold it up. Why don't you, as homework, take these reference photos, do 1, 2, all of them, and see what you can come up with in the way of solutions to finding depth, color, reflection, and movement. Okay, I'm coming back here to to say goodbye. I hope you had a really fun time with me today. I had a great time, even after our disaster of the computer mess.
Yeah, that was crazy.
That was crazy. So if there's any more questions real quick, I'd be happy to answer. And there's that blue I got.
On your nose.
Right off the bat, it looks.
We did have one question.
Yes.
Gisela asked, Dianna, since the dominant color is green, why not tone the canvas green?
That is a good point. And I think that I might actually tone the canvas a warmer green that's actually there, so that when I lay those brush marks on, they have something to lay against. Usually my canvas toning has to do with creating some kind of contrast, so that when my thick brush marks go down, they really ride on top of something and look kind of, unique and look like a thing. I love my brush marks to look like a thing. So, but that's a great question. And I actually think, Gisela, you should try it when you're doing your homework and see how it works for you. It might work really well. Some people would put black under this, so those dark shadows on the rocks would really pop. Some people would put red under this as a contrast to all that green. So it really is a matter of exploring and just trying to figure out what really works for you, for your brush mark style.
Totally.
Yeah, right. Any other questions we have?
I don't think so.
Okay, great.
I think
well,
we're cutting close on time. So
yeah, we're all good then. And thank you for this. Next month is sunrise and sunset.
yes.
And we'll be doing another. And I will, when I get done with any of these homework things that I've given you to do, I will post them. Maybe not tomorrow. I've got my grandson today, so yeah,
No
that's the truth.
worries.
But maybe by Sunday, I will have some things posted, and you post too. And let's all look and see solutions that we've come up with. I would love to
Yes.
see yours. Okay.
Fantastic.
All
So
right.
thank you guys so much for watching.
Thanks.
I'm gonna upload this to the journey right after this, so you can watch the replay within the next couple hours or so. So anyway, we love you, we believe in you, and we'll see you next time. Peace.
Goodbye, everyone. Thank you for being here.